You're watching live from Paris here on France 24. The big news here in France this Thursday evening is that the country is going back into coronavirus lockdown. President Emmanuel Macron announcing that in front of a large television audience at 8 p.m. Local time. And here to discuss the potential economic implications of it all, our business editor, Kate Moody.
Yeah, Chris, there are going to be huge implications, of course. Emmanuel Macron did reject the idea that we need to choose between protecting lives and livelihoods. He said protecting the economy is a priority, but still not his top priority. Now, to that end, restaurants, cafes, and non-essential businesses will be closed for at least the next month. About a third of France's labor force is expected to be able to work from home. But unlike during the spring lockdown, schools will remain open and public services, factory activity, and construction projects will continue. That likely means the economic impact won't be quite as brutal as the first time around. Like much of Europe, France is already facing its deepest recession since World War II. GDP dropped nearly 6% in the first 3 months of the year as those first effects of the pandemic and lockdown began to be felt in March. The economy plunged nearly 14% for the next quarter from April to June. We'll be getting the official third quarter data later on this week. It's likely to show a fairly strong bounce back over the summer, but now the fourth quarter of 2020 likely to sink again. President Macron confirmed that the state-sponsored furlough or wage protection scheme will be extended, as will direct aid for small businesses. More support for independent workers and small businesses is to be unveiled over the coming weeks, but analysts have long warned that a wave of bankruptcies could be on the horizon.
Je pense aujourd'hui vraiment d'une façon très intime à tous ces indépendants, à tous ces entrepreneurs, à tous ces commerçants qui s'attendent à une sorte de coup près. C'est quoi? C'est-à-dire qu'ils se disent « mon seul horizon, c'est de déposer le bilan ». Et quand vous déposez le bilan et que vous êtes indépendant, vous n'avez plus rien. Il vous reste vos dettes et vous n'avez plus de revenus. Donc, comment fera-t-on demain pour relever notre pays si les entreprises sont moribondes?
Stock markets tumbled as those tighter restrictions loomed. The major European indices finished their session sharply lower before Macron's speech, losing about 2.5% in London, 3 1/3 here in Paris, and over 4 percentage points each in Frankfurt and Milan. Wall Street followed suit. We saw losses of well over 3% at the closing bell across the board there. The Dow Jones sinking over 900 points in its worst single trading day since June. Earlier, I spoke to Jasper Lawler, LCG's head of research in London, about Wednesday's market sell-off.
It really is all about those lockdowns. Obviously, there's other things going on, the US election and the likes, but the fact that as an analyst or as an economist and the way you price assets in the market, it's all contingent on a certain economic scenario. And I think what most had baked into the cake was that actually we were on a steady recovery, a steady economic recovery that bottomed out. We had the worst of it in March. And since then, we've seen economic data improve. We've seen corporate earnings improve. And the idea was that it was going to be some form of recovery. There were arguments about different shapes, V's, W's, and K's. But the recovery was the main point. Now all that's being thrown out the window, because if you do introduce a new lockdown, the result is going to be similar to that in March. And so what you look at is a double dip recession in the economy, and obviously markets are forward pricing mechanisms. We're probably going to see a double dip in the stock market if they foresee a double dip recession in the actual economy.
Jasper Lawler speaking earlier there. Well, Boeing is reviewing production levels and could cut an additional 7,000 jobs before the end of next year. It would bring total job losses through buyouts, layoffs, and early retirement to some 30,000, reducing the company's global workforce to 130,000. The American aviation giant reported $466 million in losses from July to September. That's its fourth consecutive quarter in the red. Chief Executive Dave Calhoun told investors he expects airline traffic to remain about a third of pre-pandemic levels throughout the end of 2020 and recover fully in about 3 years' time. He also said he expects full regulatory approval of the revamped 737 MAX plane in time to resume deliveries for the fourth quarter. Boeing shares dropped about 4.6% on the close. The United States says it will not endorse Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala as the next managing director of the World Trade Organization, despite consensus from other member states. A WTO spokesman said Washington was the only delegation to reject the former Nigerian finance minister and insist it would continue supporting South Korea's Yoo Myung-hee. The position does need to be approved by all 164 WTO members. The U.S. position sets the stage for more intense lobbying and what the spokesman described as frenzied activity before the November 9th deadline. That falls just a few days after the US presidential election. It's not clear whether the outcome of that domestic vote could affect the leadership contest at the international organization. Either of the two remaining candidates would be the first woman to lead the WTO. Pharmaceutical giants Sanofi and GlaxoSmithKline have pledged that they'll reserve 200 million doses of a coronavirus vaccine if and when they find it for equitable distribution among poorer countries. A number of drug makers are conducting clinical trials of potential vaccines, but there's been concern about who will be able to access them and when. The French and British companies have now signed a statement of intent to make sure that people in developing economies can be vaccinated against COVID-19. This weekend, the World Health Organization warned against vaccine nationalism. Of course, Chris, all eyes on all of these pharmaceutical companies as they race to try to become the first with a proven successful vaccine.
There may be some hope, though it doesn't really feel like it tonight.
Sometime in the months to come,
Kate Moody,
perhaps.
thank you very much. That was Business. The news headlines coming up shortly.